I had been working at Northgate Digital Solutions for a little over 6 years when I learned one of the hardest lessons of my professional life. Sometimes being good at your job becomes the exact reason certain people decide to use you. At 34, I had reached a point in my career where I finally felt secure. I worked as a senior operations analyst, which basically meant I was responsible for keeping several internal departments functioning without falling apart. Most people hear a title like that and imagine something simple. Spreadsheets, emails, few meetings, maybe some reports. The reality was far more exhausting. I managed internal project coordination between our client services team, finance department, software implementation specialists, and upper management. If deadlines shifted, I adjusted timelines. If departments stopped communicating, I fixed it. If major clients needed urgent project restructuring, I handled documentation and internal execution. Most days felt like solving 20 separate problems at once while pretending everything was under control. But honestly, I loved my work. I liked the structure. I liked being the person people relied on when complicated situations needed fixing. Over time, I had built a strong reputation inside the company. Managers trusted me. Senior executives regularly requested me for high-priority projects. Even new hires often got assigned to shadow me during training, because leadership considered me one of the most efficient employees in operations. I had earned that reputation slowly. Years of late nights. Years of fixing mistakes other people missed. Years of proving I could handle pressure without complaining. And I genuinely believed hard work eventually paid off. Looking back now, that belief made what happened next far worse. Everything started changing when management hired Vanessa. Officially, she joined as a project coordination specialist. Technically, she was supposed to support my team. Karen, our department director, introduced her during Monday morning briefing. I remember sitting near the center conference table reviewing implementation reports when Karen walked in smiling. "Everyone," she said, "this is Vanessa Cole. She'll be joining operations starting today." Vanessa smiled politely. She looked around 28. Perfect makeup. Perfectly styled hair. Designer handbag. Very polished. The type of person who immediately looked like she understood how corporate environments worked socially. Karen continued, "Claire will help get you familiar with internal workflow systems." I nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." Vanessa smiled warmly. "Thank God. I heard you're basically the person who keeps this whole place running." Everyone laughed. At the time I thought it was harmless. The first week went completely normally. I trained her on our internal systems, showed her how we tracked active client accounts, explained reporting procedures, demonstrated how we organized weekly operational dashboards. Nothing unusual. She seemed friendly, maybe a little overly casual for someone brand new, but nothing concerning. Then small things started happening. First it felt innocent. One afternoon Vanessa walked over carrying her laptop. She smiled apologetically. "Hey, quick question." I turned away from my monitor. "Sure." She sat beside me. "I'm trying to finish this client allocation report, but honestly I'm completely lost with these forecasting formulas." I glanced at the spreadsheet. It was simple. Basic allocation formulas. Nothing difficult. I explained how the calculations worked. She frowned. "I'm sorry. I still don't really understand." I checked the clock. I had my own deadline in 40 minutes. So I said, "Here. I'll fix this one quickly and tomorrow I'll walk you through it again." Her face brightened immediately. "You're seriously saving me right now." I finished her report in 10 minutes. Didn't think about it again. 2 days later. Same situation. Different task. This time it was project scheduling software. "Claire, can you help me for just a second?" Then client progress reports. Then weekly department summaries. Then internal billing documentation. And somehow, I kept helping. Mostly because I remembered what it felt like being new. Corporate systems can be overwhelming at first. So I kept telling myself she simply needed time. One evening around 6:30 p.m., I was still sitting at my desk finishing quarter-end reporting. Vanessa walked over carrying a stack of printed documents. She looked stressed. "Please tell me you can save me again." I rubbed my eyes. "What happened?" She dropped the papers beside me. I have to submit tomorrow's implementation summary, but I completely messed up the workflow projections. I stared at the papers. This wasn't a small request. This was nearly 2 hours of work. I looked up. You've been here almost 3 weeks. She sighed dramatically. I know. I'm still adjusting. I hesitated. She noticed. Then softened her voice. Please. Just this once. I remember laughing quietly. You've said just this once about 6 times already. She smiled. And I appreciate every single one. I stayed nearly 2 extra hours that night finishing her entire report. By the time I got home it was almost 10 p.m. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I had no reason to think otherwise. Over the next month things escalated. Vanessa stopped even pretending to do certain assignments. She'd walk over casually and say things like, "Can you take over this report? I'm buried." Or, "I'm terrible with these financial summaries. You're so much faster." Or sometimes simply, "I know you'll probably do this better than I can." And stupidly, I kept saying yes. At some point I was effectively doing work for 2 employees. My own workload had become ridiculous. I started skipping lunch breaks, staying late almost every evening, answering internal emails from home. One Thursday night I finally noticed something strange. We had weekly management review meetings every Thursday afternoon. During these meetings, department leads discuss project progress and employee performance. I walked into the conference room carrying operational reports. I had spent nearly 3 days preparing. Vanessa sat near Karen already smiling. Karen started the meeting. Before we begin, she looked directly toward Vanessa. I want to recognize some excellent work this week. I remember smiling automatically. I assumed she meant me. Karen continued. Vanessa has adapted incredibly fast. I frowned slightly. Karen kept talking. Her reporting structure on the Morgan Financial account has been outstanding. My stomach tightened instantly. Morgan Financial. I had completed that report. Vanessa smiled modestly. Oh, honestly, I'm just learning from everyone. Karen nodded approvingly. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The room filled with polite applause. I sat there completely silent. I looked toward Vanessa. For half a second, she looked directly at me and smiled. But something about that smile felt wrong. Not grateful. Not embarrassed. Confident. Like she knew exactly what she was doing. After the meeting ended, I caught up with her near the elevators. Vanessa. She turned. Yeah. I crossed my arms. Why did Karen just praise you for work I did? She tilted her head. What do you mean? The Morgan Financial report. She shrugged casually. Well, technically I submitted it. I stared at her. You submitted work I completed. She leaned slightly closer. Claire. Her tone suddenly changed. Much colder. We're a team. I frowned. That's not what this is. She smiled faintly. Then maybe next time don't volunteer to help. I stared at her. For several seconds neither of us said anything. Then she adjusted her bag and simply walked away. I stood there near the elevator feeling something uncomfortable settling in my chest. That was the exact moment I understood. This wasn't a struggling new employee asking for help. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. And somehow, I had spent nearly 6 weeks letting her build a reputation using my work. The next morning, I arrived at the office determined to stop. No more extra reports. No more helping with assignments she was paid to complete herself. No more covering her responsibilities. I thought setting boundaries would solve everything. I had absolutely no idea. That was the moment the real problems were about to begin. The following Monday, I came into the office earlier than usual. I wanted a quiet hour to catch up on my own backlog before the usual chaos started. Over the previous 6 weeks, I had fallen dangerously behind on several of my own responsibilities because so much of my time had gone toward cleaning up Vanessa's work. Or more accurately, doing her work entirely. That morning I made a decision. Things were changing. No more fixing tasks she was perfectly capable of handling herself. No more staying late because someone else refused to learn the job. No more letting management assume she was performing well because I kept protecting her. At around 9:20 a.m., right on schedule, Vanessa appeared beside my desk. She had her laptop tucked under one arm and the exact same expression she always wore whenever she needed something. Slight smile. Slightly helpless. Carefully rehearsed. "Morning," she said. I kept typing. "Morning." She pulled a chair next to me. "Can you help me with the Hamilton project documentation?" I didn't even look up. No. There was silence. I could physically feel her staring at me. Finally, she laughed awkwardly. "Wait, what?" I turned toward her calmly. "I can't do your documentation today." Her expression shifted immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed the mask slipping. "Oh." I nodded. "I've got 3 overdue internal reports because I've been helping everyone else too much." She sat there quietly for several seconds, then forced a smile. "Okay, sure." And walked away. I remember feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in weeks, I had protected my own time. Unfortunately, that was apparently not the response she expected. Around noon, I noticed something unusual. Vanessa wasn't speaking to me. Not casually. Not professionally. Nothing. At first I thought maybe she was embarrassed. Then during lunch break I overheard her speaking quietly with 2 people from client relations near the coffee machine. I wasn't trying to listen, but I distinctly heard my name. Honestly, I've been uncomfortable for weeks. I froze. One of the women asked something quietly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "She's been acting weird ever since I started." The conversation stopped when they noticed me standing nearby. All 3 immediately walked away. That uncomfortable feeling returned instantly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. By late afternoon I got confirmation. At exactly 4:47 p.m., an email appeared in my inbox. Sender. Human Resources. Subject. Meeting request. Mandatory attendance required. My stomach tightened. I opened the message. "Claire. Please report to conference room B tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock regarding an internal workplace concern recently brought to our attention. Attendance required." No further explanation. I stared at the screen. Jessica from accounting happened to walk past my desk and noticed my face. She stopped. "You all right?" I rotated the monitor slightly so she could read the email. Her eyebrows lifted immediately. "HR." I nodded slowly. "No idea what this is about." She frowned. "That's strange." I tried convincing myself it was probably routine. Maybe unrelated. Maybe some internal policy update. But deep down, I already knew. The timing was too perfect. The next morning I arrived early. At 8:58 exactly, I walked into conference room B. 3 people were already waiting. Rebecca from Human Resources, my department director Karen, and Vanessa. The second I saw Vanessa sitting there with crossed arms and carefully neutral expression, everything clicked. Rebecca motioned toward the empty chair. "Please sit, Claire." I sat slowly. Karen avoided eye contact completely. That immediately worried me. Rebecca folded her hands on the table. "Claire, we're here today because concerns have been raised regarding workplace behavior involving interactions between yourself and another employee." I stared at her. "Workplace behavior?" Rebecca nodded. Vanessa finally spoke. And the second I heard her voice, I realized I had badly underestimated her. She sounded emotional. Carefully emotional. Like someone performing. "For several weeks," she began quietly, "I felt increasingly uncomfortable working with Claire." I turned toward her. She continued. "I've been trying very hard to adjust since joining the company." Pause. "But I've consistently felt dismissed and undermined." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rebecca looked at me. "Vanessa has reported ongoing concerns involving hostile communication." I blinked. "Hostile?" Vanessa continued immediately. "She frequently makes me feel incompetent." I stared at her in disbelief. Karen finally spoke. "Claire, I've personally noticed tension between you two." I looked directly at Karen. "Tension?" Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "I've asked for help several times since joining." That almost made me laugh. "Several times?" She kept going. "But over the last week Claire has become aggressive and refuses to support team collaboration." Aggressive? I sat there speechless. Rebecca looked at a printed document in front of her. There are also reports you recently embarrassed Vanessa publicly regarding assigned work. I frowned. What? Vanessa immediately answered. Near the elevators last Thursday. The confrontation. She reported that. I turned toward Rebecca. Are you seriously investigating me because I stopped doing someone else's work? Karen spoke sharply. Watch your tone. I stared at her. No. I'd actually like clarification here. Rebecca maintained professional expression. Claire, Vanessa feels she has been subjected to a hostile work environment. Hostile work environment. I physically leaned back in my chair. This entire thing was insane. I looked directly at Vanessa. She refused to meet my eyes. Rebecca continued. We need to understand whether inappropriate behavior has occurred. I sat quietly for a few seconds, then asked one question. Can I speak honestly? Rebecca nodded. Of course. I looked around the room slowly, then said, Vanessa has not been doing her own job since the second week she started here. Complete silence. Vanessa immediately shook her head. That's not true. I ignored her. For nearly 6 weeks I've been completing her reports, fixing her client documentation, preparing her financial summaries, and handling assignments. Management believes she completed herself. Karen frowned. That's a serious accusation. I looked directly at her. It isn't an accusation. Vanessa jumped in quickly. She offered to help me. I nodded slowly. At first. Rebecca wrote something down. Then asked, do you have proof? That question changed everything. Because unlike Vanessa, I document everything. Always. I looked directly at Rebecca and answered calmly, yes. For the first time during the entire meeting, Vanessa's expression changed. Only slightly, but I noticed it immediately. She hadn't expected that answer. Karen folded her arms. What exactly do you mean by proof? I reached slowly into my bag, pulled out my laptop, and placed it on the conference table. Vanessa stared at it. Something had changed in her eyes now. Not confidence. Concern. Real concern. I opened the screen, logged into company email, opened internal project archive, then looked directly at Rebecca. I've spent 6 years in operations. I rotated the screen toward them. I save everything. Nobody spoke. I clicked the first folder and quietly said, I think all of you are about to realize this meeting is going in the wrong direction. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second, and suddenly, the entire atmosphere inside that room changed. The room went completely silent. I noticed Rebecca from HR stop writing almost immediately. Karen leaned slightly forward in her chair. Vanessa was staring directly at my laptop now. I had spent years building one habit that ended up saving me countless times in corporate environments. I documented everything. Not because I expected conflict. It was simply part of how I worked. Every internal request. Every deadline adjustment. Every shared project file. Every revision history. Every email chain. Operations teaches you very quickly that memory means nothing. Documentation is everything. I opened my Outlook archive first, then turned the screen toward Rebecca. Let's start here. She adjusted her glasses. The first email sat at the top. Sender Vanessa. Date 5 weeks earlier. Subject. Need help urgently. I read aloud. Claire, I completely messed up the Hamilton reporting templates. Could you please take over this one? I honestly have no idea how the system works yet. I clicked the second email. Different date. Different project. Same pattern. Can you handle the financial allocation report for me? I'm still learning and Karen wants this submitted by noon. Then a third. And a fourth. And a fifth. I kept scrolling. Rebecca's face changed first. She wasn't looking skeptical anymore. Karen slowly leaned closer. Vanessa finally spoke. I was asking for guidance. I turned toward her calmly. Guidance. Then I clicked another folder. Internal task assignments. Timestamp records. Project ownership logs. I opened the Morgan Financial Account Report. The exact report Karen had praised Vanessa for the previous week. I pointed toward metadata. Project preparation time. Then scrolled lower. File creation history. Then lower. Editing log. There, clearly visible. Created by Claire Matthews. Edited by Claire Matthews. Finalized by Claire Matthews. The only action connected to Vanessa's account. Submission button pressed. Vanessa Cole. Karen stared at the screen silently. I opened another report. Then another. Then another. 5 major client accounts. Every single one showed the same pattern. Vanessa assigned. Me completing nearly all operational work. Vanessa submitting finished documents. Receiving public credit. Rebecca finally spoke quietly. How many projects are we talking about? I answered immediately. 27. The room fell silent again. Karen looked stunned. 27. I nodded. Over 6 weeks. Vanessa immediately tried recovering. She volunteered. I finally looked directly at her. And for the first time, I stopped being polite. No. My voice was calm. Very calm. You manipulated me. Her expression hardened instantly. I kept going. You came in pretending you needed help learning internal systems. I clicked another folder. Slack communication logs. Months of internal chat history. Message after message. Vanessa asking me to complete assignments. Vanessa forwarding deadlines. Vanessa sending phrases like, "You're honestly better at this than I am. I know you can finish faster. You're literally saving me again." I looked toward Rebecca. This isn't occasional support between coworkers. Then I pointed toward dozens of messages. This is systematic delegation of her entire workload. Rebecca slowly nodded. She understood now. Karen suddenly turned toward Vanessa. Why exactly have I been receiving reports indicating strong independent performance? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I answered for her. Because she let management believe she was doing work I completed. Karen's expression changed dramatically. For the first time in 6 years, I watched her genuinely lose composure. She stood abruptly. This can't be right. I looked at her. It gets worse. Both Karen and Rebecca turned back toward me. I opened one final folder. Private internal messages. Vanessa had apparently forgotten one important detail. Our internal communication platform archived deleted conversations for 30 days. I clicked the recovered messages. A conversation between Vanessa and another employee from client relations. I enlarged the screen and read aloud. Vanessa had written, "Honestly, this place is easier than I thought." Another message. "Claire basically does everything if you act helpless long enough." Then another. This one made the room feel ice cold. Management already thinks I'm outperforming expectations. At this rate, I'll probably get promoted before year-end. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I slowly looked toward Vanessa. Her face had gone completely pale. Rebecca leaned forward immediately. "Wait." She pointed toward another deleted message further down. Clicked it. Vanessa had written, "She's finally catching on." Then, "If she stops helping, I'll just make HR think she's creating problems." The entire room froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The message spoke for itself. Karen stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. Rebecca sat back slowly, then looked directly at Vanessa. Her professional HR tone was completely gone now. "You filed a formal hostile workplace complaint." She paused. "As retaliation?" Vanessa immediately shook her head. "No, that's not what happened." Rebecca turned the laptop back toward herself. "You fabricated a workplace harassment claim." Vanessa started panicking now. I was frustrated. Karen's voice came out sharp enough that even I was surprised. Frustrated. Vanessa looked toward her desperately. "I just needed more time to learn." I laughed quietly. That made everyone look at me. I stared directly at Vanessa. "You know what's interesting?" She said nothing. I continued. "During 6 years here, I've trained 12 new employees." I folded my arms. "You're the only one who somehow needed another person to do almost every assignment for 6 consecutive weeks." Vanessa looked like she wanted to disappear. Rebecca stood up, then said firmly, "Vanessa, I need you to remain available while we review all internal communications immediately." Karen stood too. But unlike Rebecca, she was staring at me now, and I could immediately tell something else was happening in her head. Something uncomfortable. She had publicly praised Vanessa repeatedly. She had ignored my workload. She had completely accepted Vanessa's version of events. Now, she understood how badly she had misjudged the entire situation. Vanessa suddenly stood. I think this is being exaggerated. Rebecca turned immediately. Sit down. Vanessa hesitated, then slowly sat again. I started closing my laptop. For the first time in nearly 2 months, I felt calm. But then something unexpected happened. Rebecca looked toward me and asked, Claire. I paused. Yes. She folded her hands together. How many other employees have been covering Vanessa's workload? I frowned. What? Karen immediately looked confused too. Rebecca rotated the laptop slightly. There were additional internal messages. Messages I hadn't fully reviewed. Vanessa had been communicating with 3 other employees. 3 people from separate departments. Similar requests. Same behavior pattern. Same manipulation. Rebecca quietly said, It looks like this may be much bigger than we thought. I stared at the screen again. New names. New conversations. New evidence. And suddenly I realized I hadn't been the only person she had been using. For nearly 2 months, Vanessa had quietly been manipulating half the department. And somehow, nobody noticed. Until now. Rebecca immediately called for a full internal review that same afternoon. What had started as a simple HR complaint against me had now turned into something much more embarrassing for management. And the worst part for them? The evidence was overwhelming. I stayed in the conference room while Rebecca began contacting other employees whose names had appeared in Vanessa's message history. Karen had gone completely quiet. I could practically see her replaying the last 2 months in her head. Every meeting where she praised Vanessa. Every time she overlooked my workload. Every decision she made based entirely on assumptions. For years Karen had built a reputation as someone who claimed she could read people. At that moment it was obvious she had completely failed. About 20 minutes later the first employee arrived. David from Client Relations. Rebecca asked him to sit. She spoke calmly. David, we're reviewing some concerns involving workflow delegation. We need complete honesty. David looked confused. Then noticed Vanessa sitting silently near the far end of the table. His entire expression changed. Rebecca asked directly, Has Vanessa asked you to complete work assigned to her? David stared for several seconds, then slowly nodded. Yes. Vanessa immediately interrupted. That's not true. Rebecca raised her hand sharply. Do not interrupt. David continued. She asked me to help with client documentation a few times. I asked quietly, How many times? He looked uncomfortable. Probably 8 or 9. Karen turned toward him. 9 times. He nodded. I thought she was overwhelmed. Rebecca wrote notes quickly. 10 minutes later another employee entered. Melissa from Finance. Same question. Same answer. Vanessa had repeatedly asked her to prepare internal cost projections assigned under Vanessa's name. Then another employee. Jordan from Implementation. Same story again. Vanessa had forwarded technical deployment reports she was supposed to complete herself. By now the pattern was undeniable. She wasn't simply avoiding work. She had built an entire strategy around making multiple coworkers quietly absorb her responsibilities, while management believed she was excelling. Over the next hour, 5 different employees confirmed nearly identical experiences. Each person thought they were simply helping a struggling new hire. Nobody realized everyone else was being used the same way. Vanessa sat completely silent now. No more confidence. No more polished professionalism. No more carefully rehearsed victim act. Finally Rebecca closed her notebook. Then looked directly at Vanessa. I think we've gathered enough information. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. This is ridiculous. Rebecca remained perfectly calm. You knowingly misrepresented your performance records. Vanessa immediately shook her head. No. Karen finally spoke. And her voice was colder than I had ever heard before. You filed a false workplace harassment complaint against another employee. Vanessa turned toward Karen desperately. You don't understand. Karen didn't even blink. No. Pause. I understand perfectly now. The room went silent. Vanessa looked around like she was waiting for someone to defend her. Nobody moved. Then she turned toward me, and what happened next honestly surprised me. She started laughing. Not nervous laughter. Bitter laughter. She leaned back in the chair and looked directly at me. You know what's funny? Nobody answered. She continued. She made all of this possible herself. I frowned. Vanessa pointed directly at me. Claire kept saying yes every single time. I stared at her. She smiled coldly. You think I forced you? Karen immediately cut in. That's enough. But Vanessa kept going. She wanted people to depend on her. I couldn't help shaking my head. The sheer lack of accountability was unbelievable. Rebecca stood. Vanessa. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending formal termination review. That finally broke her composure. She stood so fast the chair nearly tipped backward. You can't do that. Rebecca answered immediately. Yes. Vanessa turned toward Karen. You praised my work for weeks. Karen folded her arms. That was before I understood none of it was your work. Vanessa looked furious now. Then without saying another word, she grabbed her handbag and stormed toward the door. Halfway out she stopped, turned toward me, and said quietly, this place rewards people who know how to play the game. Then she walked out. The door closed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rebecca gathered her paperwork and left to continue formal documentation. That left only me and Karen sitting alone in the conference room. For the first time in years, Karen looked genuinely uncomfortable around me. She exhaled slowly, then finally spoke. Claire. I waited. She rubbed her forehead. I owe you an apology. I stayed silent. She continued. I should have paid more attention. That was probably the closest thing to an admission of failure I had ever heard from her. I nodded once. She looked directly at me. How long were you covering all of this? I answered honestly. Almost 2 months. Karen closed her eyes briefly, then quietly said, I had no idea. And honestly, that sentence irritated me more than anything Vanessa had done, because she should have known. I had been staying late almost every evening. My workload metrics had nearly doubled. My project completion rate had become absurdly high. Meanwhile, Vanessa somehow looked like a top performer despite barely understanding basic systems. A good manager should have noticed. I stood up slowly. I need to go finish actual work now. Karen nodded quietly. Of course. But before I reached the door, she stopped me. Claire. I turned. She gave me a look I wasn't expecting. Respect. Genuine respect. Then she said, I've made a decision. I waited. She folded her hands. Next quarter we're opening a team operations lead position. I immediately understood what she meant. She continued, I want you to take it. For a second I genuinely thought I misheard her. Are you serious? Karen nodded. You've been functioning like a team lead for years. I didn't know what to say. After everything that had happened, the sudden shift felt surreal. 2 weeks later, HR formally terminated Vanessa. Apparently once Rebecca reviewed the full internal communications archive, the evidence became even worse. Vanessa had been intentionally targeting experienced employees from day one. She understood exactly how office dynamics worked. Find competent people. Act inexperienced. Make them help. Take credit. Repeat. And when someone stops cooperating, create conflict and manipulate management. She had likely done this in previous companies too. The difference this time, she picked the wrong person. Over the following month, management quietly changed several internal policies. New project tracking procedures, mandatory ownership documentation, transparent task assignment logs. Managers now had to review actual contribution history before evaluating employee performance. Ironically, the entire company became more efficient because of what happened. 3 months later, I officially moved into my new position as team operations lead. Same company, higher salary, larger responsibilities. But more importantly, people finally recognized what I had been doing for years. On my first day in the new office, Jessica from accounting stopped by smiling. Well, I laughed. Well, what? She leaned against the door. You survived corporate insanity. I smiled. Barely. She laughed, then said something that stayed with me. You know what your problem always was? I raised an eyebrow. What? She smiled. You assumed other people work with the same integrity you do. And honestly, she was right. For years I believed helping coworkers automatically meant teamwork. That supporting colleagues created mutual respect. That effort eventually gets noticed. But sometimes, certain people see kindness differently. They see competence as something to exploit. They see helpfulness as weakness. They look at hardworking people and think, perfect, someone I can use. Vanessa thought she had figured out how corporate life works. Manipulate people. Avoid responsibility. Steal recognition. Advance faster than everyone else. And maybe in other places, that strategy worked. But she made one mistake. She assumed I wasn't paying attention. She assumed documentation didn't matter. She assumed no one would ever check the details. And in corporate environments, details are everything. So if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's simple. Helping colleagues is part of being professional. But the moment helping turns into someone quietly building success on top of your work, that isn't teamwork anymore. That's exploitation. And the worst mistake you can make at work is confusing those two things. Sometimes the person smiling beside you in the office isn't asking for help. They're testing how much they can take before you finally say no. I learned that lesson the hard way. But at least now, I'll never ignore the warning signs again.